Good afternoon, friends. Thank you for joining today. We are on several platforms. So we're on LinkedIn Live, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and we're on YouTube Live. And so if you're joining us on one of those platforms, welcome. If you want to be active in the chat that I'm monitoring is on the LinkedIn side. And so if right now you're engaging with me on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube and you want to be an active participant in the chat, go on over to LinkedIn, find the event. The event is under Adaptive Challenge Consulting and find that event. And it's live now. So you ought to be able to click join, and that way you can participate in the chat. And so today is it's our eighth session in this series, Leading with Personality. And I'll be honest, and I've alluded to this a little bit, but I'm working on a book now called Leading with Personality that I expect will be finished by the end of May. And it takes my 25 years of working with the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and it's condensing it into a way that's understandable for folks who might not have a background in developmental psychology or Jungian archetypes, or people who might not have studied this in depth, right? I delved into Jung's work, which is underneath the Myers-Briggs, and Isabella Briggs Myers's work, which is underneath it, so that I could figure out why we've all been using it so poorly, why we use it incorrectly, what the flaws are, and then how to like navigate those flaws to still get a meaningful tool for how to lead better and work better together. And so I have a few slides here that if you've been to several of my sessions, you'll know these slides. So I'm not going to reintroduce myself, but I am the senior consultant at Adaptive Challenge Consulting. I worked for 20 years in higher education, and I'm having the same button issue I had last time. That's interesting. Okay. And I've got an amazing family, and I'm also a former improv comedian. And again, if your organization is thinking about professional development, in my experience, at least, when I worked in finance, when I worked in higher education, when I worked in sales, oftentimes professional development workshops, professional development offerings were kind of dry. They were kind of dry, kind of boring. And I was an improv comedian for almost a decade. And beyond that, I also use experiential learning techniques and theories, the things that the people in the high ropes course and low ropes course world use to make workshops interactive and funny. And I am convinced that the more interactive and humorous workshops are, the better the learning sticks. And so if you and your team are considering some professional development, connect with us. I've got, probably about 10 to 12 regular workshops that I do for businesses, for nonprofits, for city and county and municipal governments and chambers of commerce, higher ed, university leaders, college and university leaders, faculty development, etc. So I've got about 10 to 12 that I regularly do, and then another 18 or so that I do that offer as well. So if you want to connect, let's connect. If you've been to any session of mine ever, you'll recognize this icon. And one of the things that I believe deeply is that we can't have any legitimate conversation about leadership, about communication, about leading with personality, without talking about the things that make us us, all the identities that make us us. So some of my identities are I'm white, and I'm a man, and I'm not currently disabled, and I'm college educated, and I'm the kid of an immigrant. And there's different things that make me me. I don't ever get to leave any of that at home. Right. The whole Alan goes everywhere I go. I don't ever get to leave and tell my wife, hey, I'm going to leave my college education at home today. It doesn't work like that. We all go with the complete us. And because of that, we're all working across and leading across difference. And we have to be real about that. Now, some people get nervous about diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And a lot of that nervousness comes from misunderstanding of how those trainings really work. A lot of it comes from misunderstanding of the words. And a lot of it's just supercharged by politicians and pundits who are trying to sell you something or galvanize a voting base or something like that. At the end of the day, though, there are people you are leading who are not like you. And so you can put your fingers in your ears and go la 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 as though that's not happening. Or you can join Adaptive Challenge Consulting in recognizing that you're going to be working across difference all of your life, and that is diversity. The best leaders listen, and that's inclusion. Equity is a different bar. Different organizations have different levels of commitment to equity. That's another bar. But broadly speaking, when we're talking about leadership, I can't talk about that as though gender's not in the room or as though race is not in the room. And also, I grew up in North Carolina, so I have a very kind of plain, everyday way of talking about this, and so I hope we can get there. Uh, so. Also, you may, if you've been to any of my keynote sessions or workshops, you're probably familiar with this graphic where I draw people's attention to the negative space between the E and the X in FedEx. Their FedEx company is a big presence where I live, and I see this logo all the time. But about 25 to 33% of every audience with whom I engage does not know that there's an arrow in between the E and the X, the orange E and the orange X, and that negative space has an arrow. And so when I speak to folks, I explain that if today's your first day seeing the arrow, we've got good news and bad news, right? The good news is you've seen it. The bad news is you've seen it. There's no unseeing it. Once you've noticed it, you can't unnotice it. And so my hope today is that, particularly as we lean into perceiving in the Myers-Briggs, which I'm framing as, why is it that some of our supervisors are bad at follow through? It tends to follow that perceiving preference. There's other parts too, but tends to follow it pretty accurately. That you have some kind of aha moment, that you have a FedEx arrow moment, an aha moment that you can never un-aha. That's my hope. So, yeah, and again, little just note to my academic friends, I understand that Jung's work, on which the Myers-Briggs is based, was methodologically insufficient for most modern universities. Totally get it. Totally get it. I think that as more qualitative research standards have evolved, I think that he would have found space in that, in some more of the qualitative methodologies and epistemologies that are out there. However, we know that he was doing backyard research. He had clients, and those clients were the basis for his work. And those clients were European, right? So we got to take this all with a grain of salt. And I was made aware a few years ago that Isabella Briggs Myers had written fiction work. I had no idea she was a fiction writer, or had attempted to be a fiction writer. And in her fiction work, apparently she used some negative racial stereotypes. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And as to whether I think we can still use this framework, can we decolonize it? Can we keep an anti-racist lens and sort of a global lens as we use this? I think we can. But my invitation is to be thoughtful as we talk about this, about the contexts in which this stuff evolved. So let's move on. Preference, really simply, and we don't do this in every session, but preference is really, it's not about your skill or your talent. It's just about a psychological preference. I have a psychological preference for right-handedness. I can do a lot of stuff with my left hand. I've got a drink right here, soda, and I can drink it with it. Watch this. It's impressive. Get ready. That's my left hand. So I do that silly example just to demonstrate that preference is not skill. Now, I will tell you that preference sometimes leads people to certain professional endeavors, certain educational endeavors, certain experiences that then build skills. So, for example, extroversion and introversion, people with extrovert preferences may seek out being in performance spaces, being up on a stage, etc. Maybe they volunteer on whatever team they're part of to do presentations at work. If they volunteer to do that because their preference is for energizing from the exterior, energizing from other people outside of them, and they're drawn to those activities and then do those activities more, sure, they will build skill, but the preference and the skill are different. And this is very, very important. And it's also important because there are a lot of assessments out there, and a lot of the assessments, Strengths Finders and the Big Five and DISC, there's a lot of ones out there that in part are hoping to capture skill, right? And self-reporting instruments are always inadequate when it comes to measuring skill. If I took an instrument that asked me how good of a dancer I am or how good of a driver I am, I might give myself a certain score on a 1 to 10 scale that a professional dancer or a professional driver might not give me, right? But my preferences, I know. My preferences, I know, because it's not about being good at something. And so when we talk about these dichotomies, extroversion and introversion, even though sometimes I fall into the shorthand of saying this is an extrovert or this is an introvert, we are all people that have preferences for extroversion or introversion, or preferences for sensing and intuition as far as the way we absorb the world around us. And so these are just preferences. We can work outside of our preferences, but when we work in our preferences, we're not going to get as tired out. And this is part of why the Myers-Briggs is a valuable tool for managers and leaders, not to assign certain tasks to different people, not because somebody can or can't do this, but just that when I have to give an assignment to somebody, when I have to give a task to somebody, Do I have some awareness of, is this person going to get jazzed and energized by this, or are they going to get drained by this? And can I, as their manager or leader, adapt accordingly? And so, classic example is if you have someone with a strong introvert preference and you know they have to do a presentation to a large constituent group, make sure that after they finish that presentation, say the presentation is 1 to 2, make sure that from 2 to 5, their schedule is blocked off for some admin time in their office where they can just be by themselves to re-energize, right? That kind of awareness, not people with introvert preferences shouldn't be doing the presentations. Oh my gosh, friends, no, never. But as they do the presentation, how does it register with them and how can you support them through that journey? So this is, again, just about preference. These are the 4 dichotomies. I'm not going to, if you are curious, you can look back at the last 7 sessions. Each of the 7 sessions takes one of these dichotomies, and the session titles are titled after sort of one of the sort of a common way that these preferences that they present themselves. And so intuition and sensing, for example, that second dichotomy is about how we absorb the world around us. Intuitive people tend to absorb the world in patterns, in what education theorists call schema or schemata, these ideas that you're lumping and grouping things into patterns as you're absorbing the world in a very patterned, nuanced, sometimes metaphorical, allegorical way. Meanwhile, the other end of that is sensing, where people are observing things in a very granular way. I show pictures in workshops, and you can go back to session number 3 of this series and see the picture and go through that exercise. But it's staggering how people on teams will look at the same picture, and when given a sort of a generic prompt, describe what you saw without any specificity, people will break down into 2 camps. One group of people will catalog everything they see on the picture. The other group will describe in detail and sometimes in story what's happening within the picture. And that's the difference in that sensing and intuition dichotomy. And sure, looking at a picture is one way of thinking about it, but you probably send emails to your teams. How do they absorb those emails? Half of them have an intuitive preference, half have a sensing preference. And if you can increase the degree to which your language in emails or any work communication reflects that understanding, you're going to be leading better. So today, we're going to be talking about the judging and perceiving dichotomy. Today's session is going to be a little bit shorter. I have a little schedule conflict coming up, and I just want to be real and authentic. And in Myers-Briggs type, I'm a perceiver, and perceivers tend to have preferences for working well under pressure and working well when things don't go according to plan. One of the ways that my perceiving preference manifests itself is that I'm not as organized as I wish I was. I'm an ENFP who desperately wishes I was an ENFJ in real life. But I'm going to break this down for you. And if you were in last week's session, then you understand some of this. But there are 2 different ways to understand the judging perceiving dichotomy. The first way is the simple way, which is if you're in a physical work environment and you move through your space and you look around and see the different people in the office. Some of them have very neat offices. Some of them have messy offices. Some of them have a day planner that is meticulous. Some have, a collage of sticky notes that try to keep them organized. The shorthand way of understanding judging and perceiving as a preference is that people with judging preferences tend to like closure, prefer closure. And because of that, they tend to present outwardly as more organized, right? People with perceiving preferences don't have that preference towards closure. The preference is more towards options. The preference is more towards ideas and possibilities. And so those individuals are probably less likely to have the perfectly neat office or the perfectly neat day planner or calendar. Oftentimes, organizing for people with a perceiving preference is more of a creative process and less of a structured or linear process. So that's one way of understanding this, that the J's in your office tend to be more organized, have a relationship with their to-do lists. It's very common among people with J preferences to, if they have something that they did that should have been on their to-do list that wasn't there, they will complete the task and then retroactively add it to the to-do list so they can have the joy of marking it off. That's something that people with perceiving preferences rarely do. It's not something that we as perceivers are driven to do, because my to-do list to me is just a tool, and I don't derive any feelings from marking things off. Sometimes relief, but I think that people with judging preferences have a different kind of relationship with that process, right? Here's the other part, and we alluded to this last week, but we're going to get into it more deeply this week, which is that truthfully, the J and the P is something that Jung implied in his writings that Isabella Briggs Myers picked up on and was like, wait a second, he left this on the table and I want to use this. And so If you go back, I'm going to go back a slide here to the, well, I'm going to go back to this slide. To understand this next part, oh, my slides keep bumping on me for some reason. So to understand this next part, understand that the first dichotomy and the last dichotomy, the extrovert, introvert, and the judging and perceiving, that those are sort of in their own categories. But those middle two dichotomies are what I call the process dichotomies. The second dichotomy is the process of absorbing the world around you, intuition or sensing. We have preferences for intuition or preferences for sensing, but that's a process of absorbing the world. The third letter is the process of making decisions, which is, am I going to make decisions based on feeling or the good of others primarily, or make decisions based on thinking or logic and principle primarily? And again, all of our decisions will involve people and principles, but which one's driving me primarily subconsciously when I'm not overanalyzing or overthinking? So those two middle letters are important. But the question is, which of those two letters is more important for your actual type, for your type makeup, and for the type makeup of those you supervise? That's where the judging and perceiving letter actually has its true power, because intuition and sensing are ways of absorbing the world around you or ways of perceiving. The second dichotomy is the perceiving dichotomy. The third one, feeling and thinking, is about how you make decisions or how you make judgments, judgment calls, judging. The third dichotomy is about judging. So when one takes the Myers-Briggs or another Jung-based assessment, and they come out with that J or that P is pointing to which of the two middle letters is your dominant in Jungian terms. So I'm going to take you to this chart, and I showed this chart last week, but I'm going to go into a little more depth this week. Here is what we call the order of type, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's a little nuance between introverts and extroverts. So everybody online, take a look at the second row and the fourth row. The second row starts with ENFJ, then goes to ENFP, then ESTJ and ESFJ, and then that bottom row. Those two rows are full of people with extrovert preferences. You'll notice that everybody who's an extrovert who has a J in their type makeup, that has a J, whatever their third letter is their number one on this chart. So the ENFJ, their third letter is feeling, and that's their number one personality aspect according to this order of preference chart. Anybody who's a P, their second letter of their Myers-Briggs type is the big star of the show psychologically. So you look at ENFP, the one right next to it, and P, perceiving, says, well, the ENFP's dominant personality aspect, dominant preference, is intuition. The ENFJ's dominant preference is feeling, right? So the ENFJ takes in the world through intuition, makes decisions with feeling. But when it comes down to it, if they have to sort of, make kind of differentiate between which is most important to them, they're going to go with feeling and the good of others first and intuition second. The ENFP is going to flip that. They're going to go with intuition first and feeling second. The interesting thing, though, about the way that this judging and perceiving thing works, and I hope this makes sense for people with extrovert preferences, your J or your P points to your second or your third letter. Everybody who's got P, extrovert something something P, your second letter is your dominant personality preference. Anybody who's got J, extrovert something something J, your dominant in Jungian terms is your third letter, whatever your third letter is. Introverts are more complex. People with introvert preferences are more complex, in so much as the J and the P don't point to their dominant. They point to their number two, and their dominant is the other of the middle two letters. And this is designed, the way I understand this is for psychological safety of people with introvert preferences. That people with introvert preferences will, by definition, because they have an introvert preference, hide their number one personality preference or keep it within their inner circle, the people who care about them, their inner circle that they trust. So if you look at the first row, INFJ, INFP, ISTJ, and ISFJ, and the third row, that's all introverts, the number one is everyone's dominant, but it breaks the rule that I just established for extroverts, doesn't it? It breaks the rule. All the I something something J, their dominant isn't their judging letter, their fourth letter. Their dominant's their third letter. Instead, it's their second letter. Their third letter, though, where the J does point, is the public face they show at work. So the way to understand this is if you look at all the introvert types here, every introvert's number one on this chart is their true dominant and Jungian terms, but they show their number two to their work colleagues and people who know them casually. And this is the nature of how introversion works as it comes to sharing your other preferences. All right. I know that might sound confusing. If you're confused, I've got an online course where we go through it in a more phased way to make it a little clearer. The book's coming out soon, and the book will also make it clearer as well. And it's a little complicated, but something else that's fascinating about this, and this is what we're going to talk about a little bit today, is what we call the blind spot. And I don't love Isabella Briggs Myers' language, the blind spot, because it to me, I'm not sure if that's ableist or not. I think it's metaphorical, but I think there are other ways to talk about it. Jung talks about it as our inferior complex, But everyone on this chart has a number 4. Now, if you take a quick look, you'll notice that every extrovert, their number 4 has a little I next to it, little I, meaning this number 4 is part of how we operate under stress. And when people with extrovert preferences get stressed, they get a little quiet. You may have noticed this in your work life. You may have noticed this with spouses or roommates or friends, that friends and colleagues of yours with extrovert preferences, when they get stressed, get kind of quiet. The opposite is true for our introvert colleagues. People with introvert preferences, you'll notice they have a little E. People with introvert preferences, when they're under stress, they tend to get a little more chatty, right? So this is interesting. But I want you to look at which of the dynamics, which of the pieces of the dichotomy is listed as your number 4. Take a look at that real quick. And I'm going to go off camera for about 60 seconds here. But here's the prompt that I want you to think about. What I want you to think about is when you're under stress, look at your number 4. When you're under stress, do you think this part of you operates? This aspect of you, which by the way is not part of your Myers-Briggs type, not part of your Jungian type makeup. It's your blind spot. It's your inferior complex. I've come to believe that our number 4 is sort of like our inner 5-year-old waiting to throw a temper tantrum. And our inner 5-year-old is going to throw a temper tantrum that is flavored like sensing, which is collecting data in a granular way, intuition, which is absorbing the world around us in patterns, feeling, which is making decisions for the good of other people, or thinking, which is making decisions primarily based in logic. That each of these will show up as our number 4, like a 5-year-old throwing a temper tantrum. So I'm going to go off camera for about 60 seconds and just ask you to reflect on the last time you were under stress. Look at your number 4. If your number 4 was thinking, last time you were under stress, were you making certain logical leaps in your brain that later you thought were faulty? Were you trying to do something good for someone else, feeling and kind of missing the mark? Were you getting overly fixated on individual little facts and things? One thing someone said 2 years ago, sensing as your blind spot, where sensing people, when it's part of their preference, can hone in on details, but when it's part of your inferior, you're torturing yourself with a detail and probably doing it in a juvenile way. Or intuition, when you're under stress, if intuition is your number 4, that you're absorbing the world in these patterned, nuanced ways where you're finding connections, but the connections are sort of faulty. So I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to reflect on the last time you were under stress. And if you want to put it in the chat, last time you were under stress, what was that like? And does it reflect your number 4? All right. So if you want to put in the chat a reflection you had, I don't know how many we have joining us today, but feel free to put in the chat anything that you notice about when you're under stress. But while you're doing that, I'm going to give some examples of what this might be like for these four inferior complexes. I'll start with sensing. Sensing is mine. I have a lifetime of experience with this. One of the ways that this shows up for me is if sensing were part of my type, I would have a preference for and would likely have built some skill around good detail recall. That's not one of my strong suits. I can do it when prompted, but it's not one of my strong suits subconsciously. But as my inferior complex, as my blind spot, the way it will show up is sometimes a boss will say something. And when I'm stressed, and it's something that might have been negative about my performance or something like that, it might have been 3 years ago. But when I'm under stress, I might go back to that one detail and torture myself about that, or something my spouse said, or something like that. So it's transfixing on that. Oh, Angela, I see a question. Would I for ESFJ pretty much be what we call overthinking? Oh, yeah. So Angela, yes, 100%. When people with extrovert preferences are in their inferior, when you're under stress, if you get quiet and overanalyze, that's exactly what's happening. And let me find ESFJ on the chart here real quick. Okay, ESFJ. So Angela, in your case, if ESFJ is an accurate type, it would mean that thinking is your blind spot. And so when you say overthinking, I'm like, yes, overthinking. And Angela, I'm going to guess that when you're under stress, that there might be a 5-year-old version of Angela who has some pretty faulty logic. I'm going to give you an idea. This is a perfect segue from sensing to thinking as a blind spot. One of the examples I give is I used to pick a kid with my kid up from school, and so my oldest son had a friend, and we would pick her up and take her home. And one day, this little girl said to me, blonde boys are mean. I'm like, okay, why do you say blonde boys are mean? And she goes, well, Jason and Jeremy are the two blonde boys in my class, and they are both mean. So when it comes to logic, if you know what a logic construct is, it's sort of like if this, then that, or this plus this equals that. There's sort of constructs to logic that are similar in philosophy and algebra. And what this little girl was offering was a logic construct in a sense, but it was a juvenile logic construct because her sample size, when she's saying blonde boys are mean as this like universal thing, she only knows two blonde boys. It's the two blonde boys in her class. So I'm a grown up. I know that, there's a whole country called Sweden, and in Sweden there's lots of blonde people and they're plenty nice. So Angela, if ESFJ is your preference type, then thinking would be your blind spot. And so when you're under stress, you might find yourself making logical leaps, going, oh, well, this happened, then this happened, this must mean this, and then stewing in it in a quiet way, overthinking, and that's your blind spot. And Angela, because you chimed in, I'll tell you that the way out of that, and you can put this on a sticky note on your desk, and this will help you. I'm not kidding. This will help you. You'll notice your 4 is thinking, but your 3 is intuition, and your 2 is sensing. So notice your number 1, feeling, and your number 4, thinking. Those are all about how you make decisions. So the thing that makes you most you, feeling, and the thing that's your Achilles heel, that's your 5-year-old waiting to throw a temper tantrum when you're under stress, thinking, both of those are your decision-making process parts. So to get out of stress, rely on your absorbing the world process parts. Rely on sensing and intuition. So Angela, write a sticky note. And on this sticky note, say, next time I'm under stress, ask yourself these 2 questions. Question number 1 is sensing, the sensing question, which is, can I collect more data or information about this thing that's stressing me out? Sensing. Question number 2 is intuition. Hey, 3 weeks from now, a month from now, 6 months from now, will this be stressing me out? Intuition is sort of zooming out a little bit. So that 2 and that 3 for everybody can be your sort of escape hatch. Think of it as like climbing a ladder out of your stress. I see a new comment. Coworkers thought I was an introvert. Yep. Angela, very common, very common. And so for those of you who are on the side or who aren't on the LinkedIn chat, Angela says gets quiet when she's under stress and has had coworkers who thought she was an introvert because she was under stress at work. But people who know her outside of work, when things are going well, know she's definitely an extrovert, right? And so yeah, when we are under stress, extroverts seem more introverted and introverts seem more extroverted. There was a job I had, my second job in higher ed, and my last year was not going well. I was the other duties as assigned had caught up to me and really interrupted my ability to do my job. And I used to be a very open door guy, like literally my door would be open, and I started closing my door because I was constantly being asked by colleagues. I have some tech skills and some design skills, and that particular department, they didn't have a lot of tech skills and design skills, and for that matter, even just computer literacy skills in terms of opening PDFs and whatever. And so in that office environment, a surprising amount of my colleagues would come to me to ask for help with things, and it started making me stressed, and it started making me more quiet. And I think that they knew that, but I don't think they understood why. And so, Angela, good point. So I've already addressed sensing as a blind spot and thinking. I'll real quick share I'm sorry, I've done sensing and thinking. I will do feeling and intuition. Feeling, I have a great example. My mom, when she was, I think, 5, told me that her mom was about to have her 35th birthday. And so my 5-year-old mom woke up on that morning and decided that she was going to do something that was person-centered. So feeling in your Myers-Briggs, in your third letter, is about making decisions based on the good of people first. And she wanted to make a person-centered decision, but she was a juvenile, right? So this is a real life juvenile, a 5-year-old. And so I ask people, if you had a 5-year-old kid who wakes up to bake a cake for their mom or their dad or a parent of some kind, do you think that most parents are going to wake up to either a perfectly baked birthday cake on their birthday with a nice clean kitchen, or B, a messy kitchen and some semblance of a cake? It's B. It's B. Because this juvenile, my mom, this juvenile was trying to do something nice for another person, but messing it up. So for non-juveniles, for adults, when we have feeling as a blind spot, we may, when we're stressed, subconsciously think, well, I need to do something to fix this with people or help people or whatever, and we might mess it up. If you remember, when we did the third dichotomy, feeling and thinking, there's some outdated statistics, but there was some data to suggest that men in the US score thinking at a higher rate and women score feeling at a higher rate. And this makes sense to me as someone who grew up in the United States in a colonized country where men and women are socialized in certain ways, where I was taught as a man to value logic and principle. And I know many women who have shared their experiences with me that they were taught to be person-centered and nurturing, right? And so some of this is nurture, not nature. Whereas Jung and Isabella Briggs Myers think we are born with preferences in Jungian terms. But so I think that many times men who have thinking, particularly if dominant thinking is part of their type makeup, that would mean that their inferior or their blind spot is feeling, and that when they're under stress, they might try to help people in a juvenile way. So, and then the last one is intuition as a blind spot. And intuition, I tell a story, and I'll sort of conclude with this story and wrap today up. For this story, we're going to have to come back to the 1950s and the antiquated gender roles of the 1950s. So I'm sorry, because I'm a feminist and a womanist, and I don't like these gender roles. But I think we have pictures of these gender roles in our head, and it's going to help me tell this story. And so the story is that there's a husband and wife, and the wife is vacuuming in her living room, and the husband's in the kitchen. And the wife sees a commercial on television for a new kind of vacuum called the Hooverlite Vac. It says, "Try the new Hooverlite Vac. It will save your back." She yells to her husband in the other room, "Oh, honey, I sure would like one of those new Hooverlite vacuum cleaners." So then the show cuts to commercial and comes back, and we see the husband talking to some of his friends. And the husband is about to do a juvenile version of intuition. Intuition is the ability to examine different pieces of information and synthesize them. Reese's peanut butter cups is an example. I think when I was born in the 70s, Reese's peanut butter cups did not exist. And then somebody somewhere in some taste lab is like, let's put peanut butter and chocolate together. And it was born. But it's taking ideas that are different from each other and putting them together in a new way, or categorizing them in a new way. But it's taking different ideas and kind of making the mashup and intuiting that they fit. So here's how the rest of the scene goes with the husband talking to his buddies. He says, "Hey, fellas, my wife really wants one of those new Hooverlite vacuum cleaners. And you know what else, fellas? Next week is my 25th wedding anniversary. I've got an idea. And then the audience erupts in laughter. Why is the audience laughing? They are laughing because they understand that intuition would tell us that a vacuum cleaner is not a good anniversary present, and especially not a good 25th wedding anniversary present. Intuition, by its nature, absorbs information with additional context. So, absorbing the information of my wife wants a vacuum cleaner. Okay, cool, that's important. But the additional context is a vacuum cleaner is a tool that requires her to do labor around the house, and so it's not romantic. Similarly, the celebration of an anniversary, especially a 25th anniversary, the context there is that an anniversary should be romantic, and its 25th anniversary is sort of a milestone that should be particularly romantic, and that a vacuum cleaner is not the right gift. In other words, this is intuition operating in a juvenile way. It's trying to combine these things, and if he shows up and gives her a vacuum cleaner for their 25th wedding anniversary, the audience is going to laugh again because he's missing the mark. That's intuition in its juvenile form. So with that, I will just say that we are complete. We've done all 8. Thank you. I know, Angela, I think you've been here for most of us, most of them, but thanks to others who've joined us across our different platforms. And get excited because the book is coming out soon. I've got it outlined. I'm reworking some content from my course. If you're really curious about this and want to go deeper, I have an online course that's not very expensive that you can take. It's self-paced. You can pause it whenever you want, but it takes this and goes into it in a deeper way. And so I invite you to check that out. And then also anybody who's in North Carolina, this just literally hit, like we just announced it yesterday. But anybody who's in Central North Carolina, I'm teaming up with 3 other companies, HumOrg, which is a new one, Mirth Management, which has been around since 2017, and then Adaptive Challenge Consulting, which has been around since 2014. And we're teaming up with the Idiot Box Comedy Club, and we're doing a free event for the community. So if you're in Central North Carolina, like the Triad or in the Triangle, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, or in Charlotte, or really anywhere in Central North Carolina, it's on a Saturday, 1 to 3, so you can get to Greensboro pretty easily. We're right in the middle. But it's called Putting Humor to Work. And so Dr. Steve Lesser, Dr. Michael Kundle are going to join me. And Dr. Lesser is the owner of the Idiot Box Comedy Club and does consulting work. Dr. Mike Kundle is a professor at North Carolina A&T State University in the philosophy area, but also has written extensively on humor. And so we're going to team up. It's a free event. You do need to register. So if you want to register, go to the idiotbox.com or I think it's called Idiot Boxers. But just Google the Idiot Box and then go to their schedule and events and register for the event. It's going to be fun. You're going to laugh and you're going to get some insight on how you can use humor within your organizations to lead better, to work better as a team. So thank you for joining me for this series. And I hope that you've gotten some cool FedEx Arrow aha moments that you can never un-aha. So take care.